This happened about 7 years ago. I've never been good with late nights. My internal clock has always preferred daylight, and anything past 11 p.m. just feels wrong. But during my sophomore year of college, I was desperate for cash, and the only job that fit my class schedule was a graveyard shift security position at a storage facility on the edge of town. The pay was decent, and they promised me I wouldn't have to do much. Just sit in the office, monitor the cameras, and make sure nobody broke in. The facility itself was massive. Rows upon rows of orange garage doors stretching back into the darkness with flickering overhead lights that barely cut through the shadows. It was the kind of place that felt abandoned even when you knew it wasn't. My first week was uneventful. I'd show up at midnight, clock in, and spend the next 8 hours watching Netflix while occasionally glancing at the security monitors. The most exciting thing that happened was when a raccoon set off one of the motion sensors. But things changed on my 8th night. I was about 3 hours into my shift, maybe around 3 a.m., when I noticed movement on one of the monitors. It showed the back section of the facility, an area that rarely saw any activity at this hour. At first, I thought it was just another animal, but then I saw it clearly. It was a person. They were moving between the units with purpose, not like they were lost or confused. Now, the thing about this job was that they explicitly told me during training that if anyone showed up after hours, I was supposed to ask to see their access code. Every renter had a unique code they could use 24/7. If they didn't have one, I was supposed to call the cops. It was a longer walk than I expected, and with each step, I started second-guessing myself. What if this person was dangerous? What if they weren't alone? But I kept going, partly because I needed the job, and partly because I was too proud to admit I was scared. When I finally reached the area where I'd seen the person, they were gone. But one of the unit doors, number 247, was wide open. The light from my flashlight revealed stacks of cardboard boxes inside, all labeled with dates and locations. Nothing unusual about that, except for the fact that the air coming out smelled terrible, like rotting meat mixed with chemicals. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but got no response. I stepped closer when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, and there was a woman standing maybe 10 feet away, completely still, just staring at me. She was wearing a long, dark coat and had this blank expression on her face. Her eyes were wearing a long, dark coat and had this blank expression on her face. Her eyes were wide, not blinking, and she didn't say anything. Just stood there. I asked her if she needed help, if she had an access code, but she didn't respond. She just kept staring. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She asked me if I'd looked inside the boxes. I told her no, that I was just checking to make sure everything was okay. She smiled then, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide and too forced, like she was mimicking what a smile should look like. She said I should look, that I'd find it interesting. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave, but I was frozen. She took a step closer, and that's when I noticed her hands. They were covered in something dark, something that looked wet. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I turned and ran. I made it back to the office in record time, locked the door, and immediately called 911. They arrived within 15 minutes, and I gave them a full description of the woman and the unit number. They went to investigate, and what they found made the local news the next day. Inside Unit 247 were 17 boxes containing stolen medical waste, including human tissue samples and contaminated blood bags. The woman I'd encountered was arrested a week later. Turns out she'd been running an illegal medical disposal operation, charging hospitals under the table to get rid of hazardous materials. I quit the next day. To this day, I can still see her face, that too wide smile, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd actually opened one of those boxes like she wanted. This story takes place during the summer of 2019. I was 22, fresh out of college, and working as a freelance graphic designer. Money was tight, so I was always looking for side gigs. One day, I came across an ad in a local Facebook group. A wealthy couple was looking for someone to house-sit their property for 2 weeks while they vacationed in Europe. The pay was $2,000. All I had to do was water the plants, feed their cat, and make sure everything stayed secure. It seemed almost too good to be true, but I figured I'd at least check it out. I set up a meeting with the wife, a woman in her mid-40s named Catherine. She was polite, well-dressed, and immediately put me at ease. It was this massive 3-story Victorian manor on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods and completely isolated from any neighbors. Catherine gave me a tour, showed me where everything was, and introduced me to their cat, a fat orange tabby named Buttons. She handed me a list of instructions, most of which were pretty standard. Water the plants twice a day, feed Buttons every morning and evening, don't answer the door unless it's the lawn service on Thursdays. There was one rule that stood out, though. At the bottom of the list, written in capital letters, it said, "Do not go into the basement." She emphasized this when we were going over the list. The basement was off limits, no exceptions. She said they kept valuable artwork and antiques down there, and the insurance policy prohibited anyone other than family from entering. I didn't think much of it. Rich people are weird about their stuff. I agreed to everything, signed a contract, and 2 days later, I moved in for my 2-week stay. The first few days were amazing. I had this massive house all to myself, a huge TV, a fully stocked kitchen. Buttons was a sweetheart, and taking care of the plants took maybe 20 minutes total. I spent most of my time working on design projects or watching movies in the living room. But then, on the 4th night, I started hearing noises. It was around 2 a.m., and I was in bed reading when I heard it. A faint thumping sound, like someone knocking on wood. It was rhythmic, steady, and it was coming from below me, from the basement. I tried to convince myself it was just the old house settling, but the sound was too deliberate. It went on for about 5 minutes before stopping completely. I barely slept that night. Stopping I hadn't seen before. There were scratch marks on the bottom of the door, deep gouges in the wood, like something had been trying to claw its way out. I called Catherine, trying to sound casual, and asked if maybe an animal had gotten stuck down there. She got really quiet, then told me not to worry about it. She said the door had been damaged during a renovation years ago. Her tone made it clear she didn't want to discuss it further. That night, the sounds came back. But this time it wasn't just knocking back. I heard what sounded like muffled crying, almost like someone was sobbing but their voice was being suppressed. It was one of the most disturbing sounds I've ever heard. I grabbed my phone and nearly called the cops, but then I remembered the contract I'd signed. There was a clause about respecting the family's privacy and not involving authorities unless there was a genuine emergency. I didn't want to lose the $2,000 or get sued, so I did something stupid. I decided to look. I waited until morning and went to the basement door. It was locked with a deadbolt and a padlock, but Catherine had left a key ring in the kitchen drawer with various keys labeled for different rooms. One of them was labeled B. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door and opened it. The stairs leading down were old wooden planks, and there was no light switch that I could find. I used my phone's flashlight and slowly descended. The smell hit me first. It was musty and damp, like the air hadn't been disturbed in years. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a large, unfinished space. Concrete floor, exposed beams, and absolutely no artwork or antiques like Catherine had claimed. What I did find were dozens of cardboard boxes, all neatly stacked and labeled with names and dates. I opened one of them, and inside were personal belongings, clothes, photographs, jewelry, documents. Each box seemed to belong to a different person. And then I saw the photographs on the wall. They were pinned up like trophies, dozens of them, all showing different people. Some were smiling at the camera, others looked like candid shots taken without their knowledge. There were notes scrawled beneath each photo with dates and locations. I didn't stick around to investigate further. I ran back upstairs, grabbed my things, and left that house immediately. I called the police from my car. It turned out Catherine and her husband had been scamming house sitters for years. They'd used the opportunity to be out of town while they committed burglaries elsewhere, using the house sitter as an alibi. The items in the basement were stolen property from previous crimes. The crying sounds I'd heard were from a sound system they'd set up on a timer, designed to scare house sitters away from snooping. They were both arrested when they returned from Europe. I never got my $2,000, but honestly, I was just glad to be out of there. I still think about what might have happened if I'd confronted them about it directly, or if they'd come back while I was still in the house. This last story happened when I was 19. I was living in a college town about 3 hours from my hometown, and one weekend I needed to get back for a family event. My car was in the shop, and the bus schedule didn't work with my timing, so I decided to use a rideshare app. I'd used them before without any issues. I requested a ride late Friday afternoon around 6 p.m. It was starting to get dark, and the app said my driver would arrive in 8 minutes. His name was Derek. His rating was 4 stars, and he drove a silver Honda Civic. When he pulled up, I noticed immediately that he seemed off. He didn't make eye contact when I got in the car, didn't say hello, and when I tried to make small talk, he just grunted in response. I figured maybe he'd had a long day, so I put my headphones in and decided to just enjoy the ride in silence. About 30 minutes into the 3-hour drive, we were on a relatively empty highway when Derek suddenly exited onto a side road. I pulled out my headphones and asked him why we'd gotten off the highway. He said there was an accident ahead and this was a shortcut. I checked the GPS on my phone, and while we were still technically heading in the right direction, the route he was taking would add at least an hour to the trip. I pointed this out, and he got defensive, saying the app was wrong and he knew the area better. That's when I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. I asked him to please stick to the original route or let me out so I could get another ride. We were now driving through rural farmland with almost no other cars on the road. Derek still wasn't saying much, but I could see him looking at me in the rearview mirror every few seconds. I texted my roommate my location and told her to call me in 10 minutes no matter what. Then Derek pulled over. He said the car was making a weird noise and he needed to check under the hood. He told me to stay in the car. I watched him walk around to the front, lift the hood, and pretend to examine the engine. But I could see him glancing back at the car repeatedly, like he was waiting for something. I made a decision right then. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could and got out on the opposite side. Derek heard the door close and immediately slammed the hood down, asking where I was going. I told him I needed to pee and started walking toward a small cluster of trees by the road. He called after me saying there was a rest stop coming up soon, but I kept walking. Once I was out of direct sight, I ran. I ran as fast as I could through those trees, not caring about the branches scratching my face. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, yelling for me to come back. His voice had completely changed. It wasn't calm anymore. It was angry, desperate. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I made it to a fence and climbed over. On the other side was a farm property, and I could see a house with lights on in the distance. I ran toward it and started pounding on the door. An elderly man answered, and I must have looked absolutely terrified because he immediately let me in and called the police. I gave them Derek's information, the license plate, everything. They found his car about 2 miles away, abandoned. Derek had multiple warrants out for his arrest related to assault and robbery. He'd been using the rideshare platform with a fake ID to target vulnerable passengers. The police told me I was lucky I trusted my instincts. They never caught him, as far as I know. He disappeared, and I always wonder if he found another way to target people or if he's still out there somewhere. I've never used a rideshare app alone since then. It's just not worth the risk. That night changed the way I see strangers, and as much as I hate admitting it, I'm more paranoid now. But honestly, I'm okay with that. Being a little paranoid kept me alive.